So especially when it comes to this particular chapter in hypo and hypersecretion, again, when we do a lot of the pathophys, and again, we're going to talk about certain conditions where glands are destroyed. We're going to talk about certain cancers that cause the things that we're going to see. Now, when it comes to a hormone, this particular gland is releasing that hormone. It's the first picture that we drew. And it's releasing it into the blood. Well, how does that gland know how much hormone to make and how much to release into the blood? It's regulated. The glands are regulated. And most often the glands are regulated by whatever effect that they're causing in the target cell. Meaning, let's say that this effect is a change in blood pressure. Well, this hormone is then going to be regulated by changes in blood pressure. Well, let's say this particular effect is the level of sodium in the blood. This particular hormone is then going to be regulated by the level of sodium in the blood. Or it could be some other hormone. And so when it comes to what tells these glands how much hormone to make and how much to release, it's done by things that are not hormones, like level of sodium or blood pressure, for example, some other hormone, and the nervous system can do it as well. And so what we'll do is that we'll take these words and we'll just draw 3 columns. Each column is going to be a different kind of regulation. And so it will be patterns of regulation. I'll just put that here at the top. So patterns of regulation. And what we're regulating is, once again, the gland that's producing the hormone itself. And so we have non-hormonal regulation. That's going to be something that's not a hormone. And then we have hormonal regulation. That's going to be a gland regulating another gland, which is then going to obviously regulate the hormone that that gland is producing and releasing. And then we have neural regulation. We're going to have our nervous system. Now, when it comes to non-hormonal regulation, all hormones are regulated by something that is not a hormone. All hormones are regulated by some other hormone, but not all hormones are regulated by the nervous system neurally. And so let's take gland here. We're just going to call it gland X. Doesn't matter what gland that is, which is then going to be producing and releasing hormone X. And so what's going to dictate what that gland produces and secretes are, again, non-hormones. Like what? How about blood glucose? Blood sodium levels. Blood pressure. We're going to get into specifics, by the way, so I'm just giving you these generically right now, but we'll have specific examples of these and hormones themselves, and I'll remind you of this particular picture when we do. What's another one? Blood osmolarity. So the concentration of solutes within the blood itself. None of those things are hormones. And so those non-hormones are regulating gland X to produce and release a certain amount of hormone X into the blood to maintain normal blood glucose levels, normal sodium levels, normal blood pressure, normal blood osmolarity, to maintain homeostasis. And then we have hormonal. And so we have gland X again. And the reason I'm using the same gland X, is that I'm showing you that, well, again, all hormones are regulated hormonally. All hormones are regulated non-hormonally. So there's our hormone X, and then we're just going to have gland Y. So gland Y, make it a different shape, releases hormone Y, which is then going to affect gland X. It'll either stimulate it or inhibit it. It just depends on the hormone. And then we have the nervous system. And so what I'll do here is, if you remember, most of you, again, I think had me during that neurobiology class. So I'm just going to put right out of the thoracic and the lumbar region there. That'll be sympathetic. I'm not going to get into preganglionic, postganglionic. I'm just going to draw that. And we're going to put gland X again. Although I did talk about a specific gland, if you recall, that would be the adrenal gland, being controlled by the sympathetic directly. but there's neural control. And so it's going to be the interplay between all of these regulatory mechanisms that's going to dictate in the end how much hormone is going to be released. Now what? Oh, and I just have a few examples already up here at the front, but we're getting into all this stuff in detail. So these are the things that we're going to be talking about specifically when we actually get into the hormones themselves. Just a few examples. Now, when it comes to the amount of hormone that's being released, these are the things that regulate it. Well, how is this particular gland releasing the hormone? Is it trickling out of the gland? Is it spiking every once in a while? Is it going up? Is it going down? And the answer to those questions is yes. All of that stuff is going to be happening. And so what we're going to do next is patterns of hormone secretion. I didn't have that on the screen before, did I? So I just showed this picture again. This gland is releasing the hormone in a certain pattern. It's either trickling out, it's going up, it's going down. What is stimulating it? What's inhibiting it? We'll talk about that now. So patterns of hormone secretion. So now what we're going to draw is this right here. And so let's do that. So we're regulating the gland, and now the gland is going to be, again, releasing the hormone into the blood. Of course, that is where the hormone gets released. If it didn't, it wouldn't be considered a hormone. And so what we'll do here is that we'll have our X and Y axis again. So again, this is the level, we don't even need that. So here's our normal level of the hormone. Here's our normal level of the hormone. And here's our normal level of the hormone. This is going to be the three different patterns: chronic, acute, and cyclic. So that's the normal level of the hormone. And if that hormone is being released steadily over time, like a drippy faucet, we consider that chronic release. So that would be chronic release of the hormone. If you're chronically releasing the hormone, if you have a drippy faucet, you're going to have a consistent amount of water in your sink over time. All hormones are released in a chronic fashion. Some more than others, meaning that some hormone level in the blood is a bit higher than other hormones, and we'll touch upon that every once in a while. So that's chronic release of the hormone. And so we have chronic release here, but then right here at this particular point in time, we're going to have some stimulus, and I'm going to say that the stimulus is what I like to call unplanned. And I'll give you an example of an unplanned. I'll give you many examples of unplanned stimuli. So we have some unplanned stimulus, and all of a sudden now, the level of the hormone goes up, 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 up. Now, I don't want you to think that this is hypersecretion. It is not. This is a necessary thing that must occur in order for that hormone to take care of whatever it is it needs to take care of. So let's go back to this, for example. Let's say that you just ate, a big pasta meal. Now your blood glucose levels are high. That's the unplanned stimulus, for example. It's not a programmed stimulus within the body. It's something that you did in order to survive, of course, because you're eating food. But that increase in blood glucose is then going to stimulate a gland to produce more hormone. The gland would be producing insulin, for example, to lower the blood glucose levels. So this is, again, the level of the hormone. Insulin, for example, went up. Why? Because glucose levels went up in the blood. Or it could be that blood pressure changed in some way that caused an increase in the release of this particular hormone itself. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that the level of the hormone, by the way, is going to come back down eventually because negative feedback is going to take over. So this should be a short-lived thing. So again, it's not hypersecretion. When we talk about, and this is what is called acute release, it can go the other direction. It can go down. So we can get an inhibition of the release of the particular hormone. And so right there, that's also unplanned. Now I'm going to put the word stimulus in quotes because it doesn't look like it's stimulating, it actually looks like it's inhibiting, but again, every gland has something that stimulates it. If the level of whatever it's stimulating goes up, the hormone level goes up, or it can go down. So unplanned stimulus again. So when it comes to acute release of the hormone, And again, acute means short-lived. It was chronic, and then all of a sudden, boom, goes way up or it goes way down. But eventually, negative feedback is going to take over. All hormones do this. All hormones are acutely released. Now, the last one is going to be cyclic release. Not all hormones do this, so I'm going to put the word some here. Now, I don't want you to think that just because I have the word some there, and I had the word some here, that these hormones that are neurally regulated are going to be those hormones that are cyclically released. That's not the way that it works at all. All right? It just so happens that neurally some and cyclically some, that's all. So what is this going to look like? It's going to actually look exactly like that, but for a different reason. It's programmed within the body itself. So initially, chronic, and all of a sudden right here, I'm going to put the word, instead of unplanned, I'm going to put the word programmed. And I'll just give you a couple of examples right now. So a programmed stimulus, and it can go either up or it can go down. So we get a big increase in the release of the particular hormone, or we can get a big, huge decrease in the release of the particular hormone. But in both cases, it's a programmed stimulus. Now, what do I mean by programmed? I'll give you a couple of examples. So growth hormone, for example, highest levels of growth hormone are during deep sleep. That's programmed within your body. The lowest level of growth hormone is right in the morning when you're waking up. So if this were growth hormone right here, the programmed stimulus over here with this arrow, that would be deep sleep. This arrow right here would be right when you woke up this morning. So growth hormone is a cyclically released hormone, but it's also acutely released. It's also chronically released. Hormones of the menstrual cycle, that lecture that Dr. Matata is going to talk to you guys about. Some are cyclically released. You're going to see that. All right? You're going to see this over and over and over again. And in fact, when I talk about these individual hormones, which is what we're going to be talking about soon, I'm going to hammer this stuff with you guys. I'm going to say, I'm going to ask, is that non-hormonal? Is that hormonal? Is that neural? Is it being released cyclically? Is it being released acutely? Is it really being released chronically? Just every stinking hormone that we talk about, I'm going to come back to these over and over and over again. Hypersecretion, everything. All right? So there's no way that you're not going to learn this stuff. Before we get to the hormones, though, what we're going to do is that we're going to visit this now, hormonal regulation, in a little bit more detail. And you'll see why once we get into the hormones themselves. So, hormonal regulation, determining what gland is not functioning properly, is what we're going to do here. And this is going to be very, very important to understand when it comes to diagnosing a patient, when it comes to taking blood work, and, well, you'll see. So this is going to be our assumption. We're going to have gland X and we're going to have gland Y. So let me make sure that I do it right. Assume gland X, release of X, assume release of X, release of Y. Okay, so gland X is actually going to be at the top now. So this is going to be hormonal regulation, of course. So here's a gland. We're going to call it gland X. And again, of course, we're going to get into specifics of gland X's and gland Y's when we get to the hormones themselves. So there's hormone X. Our assumption is going to be that hormone X is going to stimulate gland Y. That's what this is, gland Y, to release hormone Y. That's our assumption. And so, therefore, if we increase gland X, hormone X, well then of course we're going to increase hormone Y. And if we decrease hormone X, well, we're going to decrease hormone Y. And at the same time, hormone Y is going to be regulating gland X. It has to. In order for gland X to properly regulate hormone Y, to keep the levels where it's supposed to be, it has to know what the level of hormone Y is at all times. So, hormone X is going to regulate gland Y, but hormone Y is going to regulate gland X. That's the way it has to work. Now, so we got that stuff out of the way. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about negative feedback. And so what we just drew on the screen a second ago was just that. That's all we drew. Now let's talk about negative feedback mechanisms that must occur in order for things to work normal. So right now what we're doing is normal. Then what we're going to do is pathophys. Scenario 1, 2, 3, and 4, that's pathophys. And again, we'll visit these things a number of times in the chapter itself, but we need to get this done so that we understand when we get to those particular hormones and the levels being up and down and whatever they're going to be, how it's going to help you diagnose a patient when it comes to certain conditions that you'll suspect that they have based on, again, signs and symptoms of the patient. You'll see. Now, what we'll do here is, now we're going to do that right there. All right? So, we're going to go gland X, gland Y again. So now let's talk about negative feedback. Let's talk about when things are working properly. So this is going to be normal. Normal regulation. Normal hormonal regulation. So, if you took the blood of anybody right now, if they don't have any type of condition, and you measured the level of certain hormones, the level of the hormone should be normal and normal. Hormone X should be normal, hormone Y should be normal. Why? Because everything's normal in the body. Now, how does that happen? It's negative feedback. And I already alluded to it just a second ago. And so let's do gland X, gland Y again. So here's gland X. It's going to be releasing hormone X. And it's going to be regulating gland Y, which is releasing hormone Y. Now, let us say that the level of hormone Y is going up, for whatever reason, all right? So let's put a homeostatic line over here. This is going to be hormone Y. So this is the level of hormone Y in the blood. And now, all of a sudden, hormone Y is just going to start to creep up. We don't want that. We want hormone Y to be within its normal range. So number one, we get an increase in hormone Y. Number one, we get an increase in hormone Y. Negative feedback dictates that if gland X is regulating gland Y and it has a stimulatory effect on gland Y via hormone X, negative feedback dictates this. So actually you're going to tell me, if we want to lower hormone Y, and gland X, which is producing hormone X, is producing a hormone that stimulates gland Y, should we inhibit gland X or should we stimulate gland X?
Inhibits, right?
We should inhibit. So number two, and again, this is normal. Number two, negative feedback dictates that we should inhibit gland X. And if you inhibit gland X, well, what's going to happen is, number three, you should get a decrease in the amount of hormone X. And if you get a decrease in the amount of hormone X, well, what's going to happen? We already know. You get a decrease in hormone Y. So how are we going to lower hormone Y when it starts to creep up? We lower hormone X. So then, as a result, number four, we're going to lower hormone Y towards normal. And if hormone Y is within its normal range, is there any reason for hormone X to be, did I go low? Yes. If there's any reason for hormone X to be low. No. So then as a result of this, number four, number five, hormone X returns to normal. So why is it that when you take blood from a patient, there's absolutely nothing wrong with them? That the level of things are normal. And if it's a couple of hormones, this is the reason. This happens like that. This doesn't take days. This, boom. And so, number one, we're up here. Number two, we're still up here. Number three, hormone X goes down. As a result of that, number four, we lower hormone Y back down towards to where it's supposed to be. And as a result of that, again, hormone X is going to also return back to normal because there's no reason for hormone X to be low at this particular point in time because hormone Y is normal. All right, again, simple negative feedback. If something is too high, you lower it. And in this particular case, we can lower hormone Y with hormone X. Hormonal regulation, this is homeostasis. This is maintaining homeostasis. Scenarios 1, 2, 3, and 4, we've lost homeostasis. We'll talk about why. Now we're going to be thorough. And so now we're going to take hormone Y when it's too low. We already know what the punchline is. We already know what's going to happen here, but we're going to do it anyway. Consistent with the picture, normal hormonal regulation. I'm not sure we're going to get to specific examples of this today. We're certainly going to on Wednesday. And again, this is going to be maintaining homeostasis. And so gland X, gland Y again. Here's our gland X. So gland X. This is hormone X. Now in this particular case, hormone Y is going to go down. Right? Yes. So we have low hormone Y. It's not what we want. We need to raise it. So here's our homeostatic line. And again, this is hormone Y. And again, when I talk about hormone levels, I'm talking about hormone levels in the blood. So we're good, and no, we're not good. So we're low. And of course, if we want to raise hormone Y, we need to then stimulate gland X. So that's going to be number 2. We're going to have a stimulatory effect. Number 3, we're going to increase hormone X, and as a result, we are going to increase hormone Y towards normal. Simple, negative feedback. So number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4, we raise. And we maintain a normal level. And as a result, because now Y is normal, X can be normal. There's no need for it to be high.
Could you shift the page up a little bit?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
So, hormone X returns to normal. All right. So, here's the figures. Now let's do some pathogens. We'll do scenario. We'll do 2 of the 4. We'll do scenarios 1. We'll do 1 and 4. How's that? So now let's talk about when things go wrong when it comes to hormonal regulation. So now we're going to talk about scenario number 1. And in scenario number 1, what you're going to do is if you're going to have a patient, and the patient is going to be presented to you, and they're going to have a certain number of signs and symptoms. And those signs and symptoms are going to point towards hormone Y being, what did I have here? Too high. So we're going to have hypersecretion of hormone Y. That's going to be your diagnosis. Now you have to confirm it. How are you going to confirm it? You have to do blood work. And so you take your patient's blood and you send it to the lab. And you say, hey lab, give me the values of X and Y in this particular patient's blood. I want to see if my diagnosis is correct. And so now let's do that. So again, this is scenario 1. I'll let you put up here scenario 1. And so let's put our gland X and Y. But what you're going to do is you're going to do blood work. And that blood work indicates that we have high levels, we'll just be dramatic about it, really, really high levels of hormone X and hormone Y. Is that the way scenario 1 is? Yep. So we have hypersecretion of both of these particular hormones, which is obviously not normal. What you should have is normal levels of these particular hormones. And so that's the blood work. And so here's gland X. And here's gland Y. And once again, you suspected that hormone Y is high based on your vast knowledge of phys and pathophys and the symptoms and the signs that your patient pointed you towards this. And so what you found is high levels of both. Now we're going to figure out which of these two glands is the source of the problem. And so now you tell me, if we have high levels of hormone Y, and we want to lower the levels of hormone Y, and we fortunately have a gland that can do that for us, what should we do to gland X? Should we inhibit it or should we stimulate it? If we want to lower hormone Y, what should we do to gland X? Stimulate or inhibit?
Inhibit it.
We should inhibit, right? So we should inhibit gland X. That's what should happen. And what should happen is the level of gland X should be low. So if the level of hormone Y is high, the level of gland X should be low. That's what's happening here.
Yeah.
It's not. Now let me ask you this. Is gland Y behaving properly based on the regulatory mechanism of hormone X?
That's a hormone mix. With the arrows, the 3 arrows.
Where am I looking?
It says gland there.
Gland X, hormone Y.
It should say.
Above.
Oh, yeah. I see where it is. Yes. So I ask you, is gland Y behaving the way that it should based on what gland X is telling it to do? So, hormone X controls hormone Y, right?
Yes.
If hormone X is high, hormone Y should be high, correct?
Yes.
If hormone X is low, hormone Y should be low, correct? That is if gland Y is listening properly to gland X, correct? This is normal. So now I'm going to ask you, is gland Y listening to gland X? It is, absolutely is. Gland Y is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, which is to release more hormone Y because hormone X is high. If hormone X is high, hormone Y should be high. That is if gland Y is working properly. Gland Y is working properly. Which of the glands is not? X is not working properly. A high level of hormone Y should inhibit gland X. It is clearly not. How do you know that? Because the level of hormone X is high. Here's our problem. That's the problem. There's nothing wrong with gland Y. It is listening, it is doing as it is told. What's not doing as it's told is gland X. Here we've lost negative feedback. Now, why? Why in the hell would gland X all of a sudden go rogue? I'll give you an example. Cancer. There's a tumor of gland X. Do you think cancer gives two shits about negative feedback? Of course it doesn't. So why is it that hormone Y is high? Because hormone X is high because we have a cancerous gland. That's one example. So, in scenario 1, we have dysfunction of gland X, and it should make sense, or hopefully, if it doesn't right now, hopefully it will, if you understand negative feedback. And that's what I was saying before. When you see something as simple as negative feedback, wherever the hell that picture is, I don't know where it is, somewhere. Like, that looks so simple right there. And it is. And when you start to get into some details of these particular conditions, then the simple stuff starts to kind of leave us. Don't let it. If something is high, you gotta lower it. If something is low, you gotta raise it. In this particular case, it's not working properly, and if you understand negative feedback, you understand that negative feedback has been lost at that particular gland. All right, so that's scenario 1. Let's do scenario 4. I'll make you guys do 2 and 3. Not that you guys aren't gonna repeat doing scenarios 1 and 4 as well. Here's another thing too, is I've had a couple of emails from students asking, like, how they should study for the course. What I do for my undergrads is, I send them an email right at the beginning of the semester. It's like this freaking long. How to study. Typically students aren't taught how to study. I was never taught how to study. I didn't figure it out until I was well into grad school. I'm gonna send that email to you guys as well. I think it'll be very, very helpful as to how to study, especially for something like physiology where you need a lot of critical thinking. anatomy, it's more memorization. Physiology, it's memorization plus critical thinking. And in the end, what in that email, as you read it, I basically tell you, do what I do at the front of the room. If you can teach somebody how to do something, it means you know how to do it. If you can take a blank piece of paper and act as though, if you don't study in groups, you know, how is it that this particular thing occurs? And you just go at it. So again, if you can teach somebody how to do something, you understand something. If you're doing this as you study and you just start to stop and stutter and all that stuff, it means you don't know it. All right? You'll see it in the email. And plus, I can talk to you guys personally about it in my office if you want to, in more detail. So that's scenario 1. Now let's go to scenario 4. What's scenario 4? Low Y, high X. All right, so that's going to be scenario 4. Okay, so gland X. In this particular case, X is going to be low. So we have low levels of X. So hormone X is low, but hormone, oh no.
Is it hyper?
Is it high X and low Y?
What am I doing here? So it's hyper, no, that one's high. I was looking at 3 instead of 4. So we have high X and low Y. And that's the other thing too, is that as you're looking at the individual hormones that we're eventually going to get to, come back to these scenarios and say, oh yeah, that's scenario 1, oh that's scenario 2, oh that's scenario 3, and that's scenario 4. We're going to see all of them when we discuss what we're going to discuss. So again, you see a patient and they have a number of signs and symptoms, and you suspect that hormone Y is low based on your assessment of the patient. And in order for you to do it the same way that I did with the other one, so here's our blood work. And the blood work shows low Y. Right, yep. And high hormone X. Now, of course, if hormone Y is low, negative feedback tells us we're going to do what to gland X? We should stimulate it, right? If hormone X is low, we need to raise it. And hormone X can do that for us. So, we should stimulate. Is that what's happening? Is gland X being stimulated? Yeah. How do we know that? The hormone level is high. So we know that that particular gland is responding properly to the low level of Y. And so everything is good here. Now, if we have high X, hormone Y should start to go up, correct? Hormone Y should be high. Is it? So where's our problem? Hormone Y, gland Y is our problem. So our problem is here. Again, we have a loss of negative feedback causing hyposecretion. Now, why would that happen? Well, this could also be cancer. Cancer can cause too much hormone to be released or too little. It depends on what the cancer is actually doing to the gland. But what we'll just say here is, we've destroyed the gland. If the gland is destroyed, you can't make that much hormone. There are autoimmune conditions, for example, that cause, like Addison's disease or type 1 diabetes. We'll talk about these things. We'll get to specific examples of all of these things once we get into the meat and potatoes of this particular chapter. All right? So, on the exam, what I'm going to do is I'll just give you some blood work. This is high, this is low. You tell me what the heck the problem is. Right? And then we'll take it a step further because we're going to talk about specific conditions. Again, Addison's disease, type 1 diabetes, Conn syndrome, Cushing's syndrome, Cushing's disease. We're going to do all that kind of stuff. All right? So, that's that. Now, this last thing before we actually get into the hormones themselves, I'm going to save this. I'm going to save it to where we actually see what are called primary and secondary conditions. And the reason I want to save it is because it's just going to be much, much easier to understand, how I've defined both of those conditions when we actually see them. So we're going to come back to this. We're going to skip it for now. All right? Okay, 45 and 45. What time did we get out of here? 12:30? Okay, about another 10 minutes or so. All right? So now what are we going to do? Now we get to finally start to talk about the hormones. Now, we're certainly not going to talk about every single hormone in the body, and we're not even going to come close. We're going to talk about I don't know, 10–15% of the hormones. Why? Because this is an 8-week course, and I only have 5 hours to lecture endocrine, all right? So I've kind of picked the big boys and girls of the hormones, so to speak. And we're gonna start at the hypothalamus. Now, why don't we start at the hypothalamus? Because the hypothalamus, as it says, very first line, directly or indirectly regulates almost every sticking hormone in the body. So that's where we're gonna start. And then the way we're gonna progress through the chapter itself is then get to the pituitary, the thyroid, all the way till we get to the pancreas, and talk about the hormones that are produced and released by these particular structures. All right, and again, get into a lot of phys, and again, more pathophys than anything. And so let us now draw that. So I'm gonna draw the hypothalamus, and I'm gonna put as well, yep, I'm gonna put the pituitary in this particular picture as well. Given that you guys did neurobiology, you guys know about the hypothalamus and the pituitary and all that, and how they're structured together. And so this would be the way I draw it. So I'm gonna take the hypothalamus, it's gonna be a rectangle at the top of the page. So here's the hypothalamus. Now the hypothalamus produces a whole bunch of different hormones. And we call them neurohormones. Now, there's absolutely nothing special about a neurohormone other than it is produced by neural cells. That's all. And there's going to be a number of neurohormones that we talk about with the hypothalamus, and then your adrenal gland, your adrenal medulla produces a couple of neurohormones as well. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to write every single one of the hormones that the hypothalamus produces and is going to eventually release. And I'm just going to abbreviate them because the names are really, really long. So, and I'm just going to go right in order when it comes to, at least I'm going to try to keep it in the same order. So we're going to do these. So we have what are called releasing and inhibiting hormones. So the names of the hormones are either inhibiting hormone or releasing hormone. And there's 6 of them. And so let's put them here. Now these releasing and inhibiting hormones that I'm about to write within the hypothalamus are directly regulating the anterior pituitary gland. So the first one that I have on the list here is prolactin inhibiting hormone. Again, I'm abbreviating it. Dopamine is prolactin inhibiting hormone. What else? Then we have gonadotropin releasing hormone, GnRH, although I'm not really going to spend much time on that. I'm going to have Dr. Matat do that because it's a big key player in the reproductive system. And again, we're trying to save as much time as we possibly can. The next 2 are going to be regulating growth hormone. So growth hormone releasing hormone, growth hormone inhibiting hormone. Then we're going to have a hormone that is going to regulate indirectly the thyroid gland, TRH. And then another one that's going to indirectly regulate the adrenal cortex, CRH. Again, I'm abbreviating these. Then I'm going to put this little imaginary line, not that it's too imaginary. So those are the releasing and inhibiting hormones. Those, again, 6 are directly, again, affecting the anterior pituitary. Then we have these 2 others, oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone, otherwise known as ADH. Oh, and this one over here, by the way, is somatotropin. That's in the notes. Is it in the notes? Yeah, somatostatin's in the notes. So I'll put that above here. So somatostatin is also growth hormone inhibiting hormone. You can use those 2 words interchangeably, same hormone. Now you know that there is a pituitary stalk in between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. I'm not going to get into the anatomy of it. So here's going to be the pituitary. This is going to be the anterior pituitary. And I'll label it. And the anterior pituitary produces its own set of hormones. And then over here we're going to have the posterior pituitary. And I'll put that here. And I'm going to put this tract right there. You guys know what a tract is, just a whole bunch of axons all bundled together. The tract and the nerve are analogous to each other. Tract is central nervous system, nerve is peripheral nervous system. Let's go back over here to the left-hand side. Let's talk about these inhibiting and these releasing hormones. Now, when we have an inhibiting hormone, I, that means that that particular hormone is going to cause the inhibition of some other hormone. Then the releasing hormones are going to be stimulatory to some other hormone. And those hormones are all gonna lie within the anterior pituitary gland. So now let's put the hormones in the anterior pituitary gland that are affected by these releasing and inhibiting hormones. The first one that we'll put here is prolactin. Then we're gonna put a couple of others here that I'm really not gonna spend much time on at all, Dr. Matad is, luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. And then growth hormone, put that up here. And then TRH is going to directly affect thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH. And then we have another hormone, ACTH, adrenocorticotropin hormone, which is going to then directly affect the adrenal cortex, which we will get to. Now, how are these particular releasing and inhibiting hormones at the hypothalamus regulating these hormones of the anterior pituitary? Well, they're going to bind to specific receptors. And how are they going to get to the anterior pituitary? They're going to get there via the blood. And so these tubes that I'm going to draw are also contained within the pituitary stalk. So they're going to get to the anterior pituitary via these little blood vessels. Let's just draw them directly to the hormones themselves. And so, what we'll do is, we're going to be released to the anterior pituitary. PIH is going to inhibit the production and release of prolactin. So what I'll do there is I'll put a negative sign for inhibition. And then gonadotropin releasing hormone. It's going to have a stimulatory effect on LH and FSH. And so what will happen here is that if you increase GnRH, you'll increase the production and release of LH and FSH. If you decrease GnRH, then you'll obviously decrease the production and the release of LH. Whereas with PIH, if you increase PIH, you'll have less prolactin. If you have, what did I just say? I don't know, I remember what I said, so I'm just going to start over again. If you have more PIH, you'll have less prolactin because it's inhibitory. If you have less PIH, you'll have more prolactin because, again, it's inhibitory. Less inhibition means you stimulate, all right? Now, with growth hormone, you actually have both of these. Lower that just a little bit. You have both of these hormones controlling growth hormone. One will inhibit, and one will stimulate. So there's going to be an interplay between those two. And then TRH will have a stimulatory effect. Again, you increase or decrease TRH, you are then going to increase or decrease TSH, same thing with CRH. So now I ask you, we have these hormones in the hypothalamus regulating the hormones of the pituitary. What kind of regulation is this? Hormonal regulation, right? Now I'm showing you hormonal regulations. Let me go back to my pictures if I can find them. So what I just showed you is this. Hypothalamus, anterior pituitary. All right? Again, I'm just going to go back to these over and over and over again. Same thing when it comes to this, and we come back to this over and over again. So I'm actually just going to push both of these to the side. Now what? One more thing before we take a break. And that is, when it comes to oxytocin and ADH, those are non-releasing and inhibiting hormones. And those hormones have nothing to do with the anterior pituitary. What's going to happen with these is that as they are produced by the neurons of the hypothalamus, they're going to make their way through the axons, not the blood, and then like a neurotransmitter that is released at the synapse, they're going to be dumped into the posterior pituitary. So your posterior pituitary does not produce any hormone whatsoever. The hormones of the posterior pituitary are produced by the hypothalamus. And then they are stored within the posterior pituitary. I thought, well, Dr. R, I thought you said that every hormone needs to be released into the blood, and all the releasing and inhibiting hormones were. Yeah. Well, oxytocin and ADH will be released into the blood by the posterior pituitary. And those are actually the first two hormones that we're going to talk about in lots of detail after our break. So let's take a break, 5 minutes. When we come back, we will continue our story.
All right. So the negative is the inhibitory, and then the plus is for the stimulating.
Exactly.
So for the plus, would it be fair to say it's like a what is that? They both right. If it's increased, then it also increase.
For the release, for the.
For the release,
Yep,
yes. And then for the negative will be like antagonist kind of.
exactly.
Okay. Inverse relationship.
Literally, I want to become a lifeguard because I'm just like, whoa.